first question, can you tell us how you met?
Yes, we met while I was interviewing for a job at UW-Madison, so University of Wisconsin-Madison, and Angela was on the interview team that reviewed my candidacy.
Yes, and Virginia was an excellent candidate and wound up being the chosen candidate for the job.
And we were colleagues and then friends and then started dating after we had known each other for a bit and have been together ever since.
Well, I'm going to start, and then Dee Dee will correct me when I'm wrong, okay?
Yeah.
When I was a senior, I was going back to our fraternity house to change books and get something for lunch. And one of my fraternity brothers called me over because they were playing bridge, but there was a fourth person, a female, that didn't really know how to play bridge. And I was supposed to sit and show her how to play bridge. And the female was Dee Dee. But I was the social chairman that year, and we had a party at one of the apartments the following Friday. And so I knew she was in the sorority, and I thought her name was Debbie Smith. Maiden name was Schmidt. And so I called over to the Tri-Adult house, and I asked the person to answer the phone, "Could I speak with Debbie Smith, please?" And she said, "Well, we don't have any Debbie Smiths, but there is a Debbie. Would you like to talk to her?" And I said, "Yeah, perfect. Let me talk to Debbie." So I get on the phone, and Debbie happened to be Dee Dee's roommate. Coincidence. And I said, "Hey, Debbie, I met you at the Union." And she said, "Oh, no, I don't think you're talking to me. I think you're talking to my roommate." And I said, "Okay, what's your roommate's name?" And she told me, and I said, "Debbie, would you do me a favor? Please don't tell Dee Dee I didn't know her name." So we went out, and within 4 months, we decided it was time to get married.
No, you proposed to me 2 months after it, but we didn't get married for 18 months.
Right. That's why we've been married 55 years, because she keeps correcting me when I go off the rail.
Yeah, but the proposal was kind of interesting too, because we were sitting in his car, and he said, very romantically, he said something like, "I would like you to consider this relationship as ending in our marriage." Not very, flowery. Just consider the relationship going that way.
Yeah, I think we knew after a short period of time.
Yeah, we did.
Love at first sight.
Pretty much.
But other than her not remembering her name, yeah.
So the first question, can you tell us how you met or how you proposed? I'll let Lauren take over how we met.
I don't know. Am I supposed to tell the long version or the short version?
I think, the short version, the unabridged version sounds good.
So we met partially because of my sister's wedding. That's how I started going to St. Andrew, where Thomas went already. And I started going to the church to see how my sister was going to set it up to get married for her wedding. And I started liking the church, so I started attending more often. And my sister, who really wanted me to have a date to her wedding, pushed me to get on online dating apps, where I saw a picture of this one in the church. So I recognized the setting and realized who he was. I put it off for some time, but eventually reached out to him and said hi, mentioning his wonderful children's messages, I believe, to garner a response, and it worked. So yeah, we chatted online for a few weeks and then went on a date, and now we're here.
Yeah. The proposal is more my doing.
I hope it's not my doing.
Well, yes. But so I had been planning for a while, and I convinced Lauren after she was sleepy from night shift at a City High West High football game. I convinced her that we were going to have brunch the next day, but we needed to stop by church to go take some pictures of a path that we were going to be working on at church, which was not the plan. But so I walked Lauren out to the path, and I got her there that morning rather sleepy. And when I got to the end of the path, I got down on one knee, and Marissa Moore was there to take pictures. And then our families were waiting down in the hub then they were waiting and they saw, or we got to have a nice breakfast and take photos. And then we went to an Iowa game and I put a congratulations message on the video board.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was good.
And so how long have we been married?
We've been married just over 9 years, but exactly 9 years, 3 months, and 2 days.
The second question, how long have you been married?
2 weeks.
2 weeks.
2 weeks.
Yep, we're actually on a little mini honeymoon right now, so we're enjoying our time together. But yeah, it's 2 weeks, 2 great weeks.
And were you both from the same faith background when you were married? And yes, we are both Christian and were raised in Christian households. But what that looks like is very different. I was raised in a very traditional Presbyterian church in Milwaukee, Wisconsin.
And I was I was raised in a non-denominational evangelical Christian church in Elgin, Illinois.
No.
No,
No.
not at all.
No.
Not at all.
Go
I
ahead,
was
Sue.
raised a Christian Scientist, and there wasn't really, well, there was a Christian Science church in Iowa City. I went a couple of times, but I was 2 generations younger than anybody else that was there, and I just didn't, I didn't go back. So during college, I really didn't go to church.
We went to a Presbyterian church in Des Moines.
And that's how we ended up Presbyterians.
Was it a difficult thing to come
No,
No.
not at all. No, you couldn't get married in the Christian Science church. So we actually ended up getting married in his home church, his Presbyterian church. And so when we were looking for a church when our boys were younger, we looked at different churches, but it seemed that we liked St. Andrew the best, and it was Presbyterian, so that was closer to the tradition he'd been raised in.
Yeah, I
So
tell people Nick, our older boy Nick, liked the toys at St. Andrew the best.
they weren't broken.
Were you both from the same faith background when you were married? I grew up Presbyterian the entirety of my life. We were at First Presbyterian in Fort Dodge, and then I came down to school and started attending St. Andrew pretty early on my first fall. So,
And I think I was in a Methodist church when I was a really little kid, but then ended up in a Presbyterian church when I was like late elementary age, and have hopped around churches maybe a little bit more than Thomas has, but definitely kind of always fit into this particular faith idea, I would say. I think that was probably one of the easiest things that we had in common, honestly.
yeah, absolutely.
And so next question is, do we have children or grandchildren, and how many? And we do have 3 children. We have Franklin, Josephine, and Alexander.
We have 3 of each. We have 2 sons and a daughter, and we have 3 granddaughters. And the granddaughters are all in college, so
Fortunately, 2 of them are here.
yes. Oh, yeah. That's really nice.
And how has your faith grown or changed since we have had children?
And I agree with Virginia and say that our faith has changed since we had children. I think we always knew that we wanted to be a part of a faith background, but really went back and forth on finding something that would appropriately kind of meld our disparate backgrounds. And before children, we would try that, we wouldn't quite find it, and we would give up. But once we had children, it made it a bit more of a pressing matter. And we were able to kind of review what was in the area and find a faith community that was aligned with the values that we had and the values that we wanted to raise children in. And that's how we found St. Andrew.
Yeah, and we were really fortunate that the St. Andrew community had started to, had reviewed and developed the Statement of Inclusion. And so we knew that as a gay house that our family would be welcome, and has been. And we have been coming since before Franklin turned 2 and have been at St. Andrew ever since.
It's more important to me to set an example when the boys were still living at home and our daughter was still living at home. And so instead of sitting and listening, I stand and participate while they were at home, and it sort of stuck.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. We really didn't go to church until the boys were probably preschool and kindergarten, and then we adopted our daughter and added her to the mix, and so then we really were involved. And because St. Andrew had such a strong emphasis on children's ministry and had, ETC and basic, we thought that was a really an important feature so that the kids could make their own decisions someday.
Yeah, what I remember triggering it was we lived next to a couple that were Mormons, and they had 2 boys, and our sons would play with them. And one day Nick, our older boy, came home and said, "Dad, I want to learn more about Jesus." Bingo, that's it. Let's start going to church. Yeah.
Who is the better cook? So I think this depends on what we're talking about or what.
I'm the better baker.
Yes, absolutely. I think I do a better breakfast.
I've never flipped a pancake in my life, so
Yeah.
I'll give you that one.
Yeah. But then I think the rest of it just kind of depends on what we're cooking. I think I grill.
Yeah, I don't touch the grill. I don't know how to start.
Yeah, but Lauren does more creative recipes.
Yeah, using fresh things from our garden that we have now.
Yeah.
But yeah, we teamwork it usually.
Absolutely.
So, who is the better cook?
I would say that would be me as far as the better cook in the family, although we both share that responsibility pretty equitably.
I'm the better baker.
Yes.
By default, because Angela doesn't bake.
Bruce, no, hands down, no question about it.
Yeah, I learned to cook in the Army.
When the kids were growing up and living at home, I cooked. But since the kids have left home, now he cooks.
I haven't had a chance to cook for you, but you've had a sampling of what I've done. Yeah.
Finish this sentence. I wish my spouse would pay as much attention to me as they do blank.
I wish my spouse would pay as much attention to me as they do videos on the internet.
Love a good cat video. Let's see. I wish my spouse would pay as much attention to me as they do sales on purses on the internet. They just show up randomly.
It's a miracle.
To our friend's dog, Gertie.
Gertie the dog came over to watch the game with us last night, and her master Judy was at the front door, and I said, "Come on in, Gertie." "Oh yeah, Judy, you can come in too." So I didn't give Judy a snack, but I did give Gertie a snack.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm thinking that for a later one, having to do with correcting, I tend to interrupt her answers and try to supply the response, and she finds that irritating, even after 55 years. So.
Especially after 55 years.
Maybe I'll just leave it then.
It hasn't grown on you, is what you're saying.
No.
It's not one of our more attractive features. So.
All right, finish this sentence. I wish my spouse would pay as much attention to me as they do blank.
You start.
I mean, I feel like we do a pretty good job. Again, we're only 2 weeks into this thing,
right.
But I don't think we get pretty distracted. We do a lot of stuff together, and
I think the only thing that came into my brain, which is totally a dumb answer because we do it together, is golf.
Yeah, that's fair.
But when you're watching golf, you fall asleep.
Yeah,
and I'm learning to golf anyway, so I don't even think it's a problem.
No,
it's the only thing I thought of.
That's good. Yeah, I don't really have one for you, so. That's what happens, I guess, 2 weeks in.
What is the other person's most annoying habit? I would say that I am most annoyed by only one of Angela's amazing traits, and that is her ability to open a package or a spice or cooking implement and leave it all over the counter and not put the lid back on.
True youngest child. I would say for me, I'm gonna switch it up. Virginia is a lover of fresh fruits and vegetables, okay? And at times she will enjoy a fresh fruit on our way to work in the morning, and then she will leave the banana peel or the apple core in my car. And that is not my favorite smell to return to in a car.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
Yeah, how much time do you have?
What is the other person's most annoying habit?
Snoring. You snore a lot.
Okay.
What you got?
Mine is the amount of half consumed or half drinking pop bottles or Gatorade bottles, and then I usually end up rinsing them out and recycling them.
I don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
And they sometimes say the things you love about a person can change as you are together longer. What do you love most about me now, and has that changed?
So Virginia is probably aware and can remember this, and hopefully this is a distant memory. But when we first met, I was convinced that I was always the smartest person in a room. And the piece that I've loved about Virginia, and especially being partnered with her, but also our partnership has almost always extended to the workplace as well. Whether that's like in the same department or in a larger kind of organization together. Virginia's just extremely wise, and she is, I think, the smartest person in the room. And so I've appreciated her counsel about the different things I face professionally, and sometimes it's just to like vent to her, and sometimes it's problem solving. But she just has a lot of wisdom to offer, I think, professionally. And that, I think, has changed as our careers have grown and as we've grown as people. Yeah.
That's very nice. Thank you. You're welcome. I think one of the things that I have grown to love and appreciate more and more about Angela is her patience and her willingness to stay with things even when they get difficult. And I know that that's always a part of our vows, or it was a very prominent part of our vows when we were married. And I think it's pretty common. Anyhow, there have been moments where we have been through some very difficult things, personally, professionally, and I have appreciated the ways in which Angela has extended love to those that it may be hard to at times. And as we're having children, you try to role model that really well, and you're very conscious with them and always try to help them understand why we want to love people. So, yeah, that's one of the things that I've grown to love about you.
Given that I don't really, I think probably with the years, what has changed is just how much I love his commitment to, to me and to our family. And of course, in the beginning, I don't think I really thought about that. So not so much that it's changed, just that I've become really aware of it over the years and really value that tremendously.
Since I stopped working because of the stressful nature of the job I did, she said I'm a lot easier to get along with. So
this is true. This is true. So that's probably something too, is that when I met him and I knew he was going to law school and I was going to be a teacher, I thought were very complementary occupations, but I didn't think about the fact that he was going to be a trial lawyer and all the stress that he would be going through all day long, and then how that would sort of, shape our lives, at home. Like no complaining about the kids when he walked in the door, because all he'd heard all day was complaints. So, wait. And the other thing I think is the fact that I taught Spanish really shaped our lives.
sure has, yes. We've had several young people come live with us that spoke English as a second language to live with us to learn. People from different parts of the world.
So
Central America, Mexico, Brazil. Yeah.
So I don't think in the beginning I had any concept of how that would affect our lives and how much we've traveled to Spanish-speaking countries and what an influence that was on our children too.
It helped me learn how to coach soccer.
It's true.
She got me a book, and I read about half of it, and I said, "Oh, this is just hockey on grass." Push to the corners and center. It was a very simple game once you get down to it, yeah.
They sometimes say the things that you love about a person change as they are, or the longer you are together. What do you love most about the other person now? Has that changed?
Picking what I love most is hard, but I think with like this stage that we're at, the thing that has like changed most about our relationship and love is like, obviously it's been a couple years since we've been together, so like you kind of go through that initial phase where like the honeymoon phase where everything's exciting and whatever, and it still definitely is, but I think we're very much in that stage of like learning to live with each other and learning to like do every day together, so you just get to see more and more of the like little things that each other like that you do for me and then I get to do for you. Like it's just those like little everyday things instead of like planning a special date or something and like being really excited with that. Like those things are still great and we still do that, but I like getting to love you for like the everyday moments that happen.
Yeah. I have always loved the way that Lauren is very thoughtful and she is a deep thinker and she is definitely one that's not afraid to share her thoughts. But she definitely takes time and she gives everything good consideration and like really thinks about it, and kind of gives you her educated and thoughtful opinion on things. But I also love that she lets me be me, because it can be really dorky sometimes.
But I think it's one of my favorite things about you, as much as I give you a hard time for it. Like, your goofy jokes and eye rolls, like, as much as I roll my eyes a lot at you, like, it makes you, and it's always a way to make me laugh or smile if I'm, like, having a rough day. I know those will always be there. So, yes, you are a dork, but I love you for it, and I'm never going to say that again.
Hello and welcome. We are so excited that you are back for another episode of 25 Live. This week on 25 Live, we're going to change things up a little bit. I want to spend a little bit more time going towards my teaching roots. We're going to take our gospel lesson today, Mark 10, verses 2 through 16, and we're going to break it down using our 5W questions. That's the way I like to teach and understand a story. I like to ask when and where, I like to ask who, I like to ask what, and I like to ask why. So this week, we're going to read our gospel story and we're going to break it down and see if we can understand just a little bit better. So let's go to God's word. Some Pharisees came, and to test him they asked, "Is it lawful for a man to divorce his wife?" He answered them, "What did Moses command you?" They said, "Moses allowed a man to write a certificate of dismissal and to divorce her." But Jesus said to them, "Because of your hardness of heart, he wrote this commandment for you. But from the beginning of creation, God made them male and female. For this reason, a man shall leave his mother and father and be joined to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. So they are no longer two, but one flesh. Therefore, what God has joined together, let no one separate." Then in the house, the disciples asked him again about this matter. He said to them, "Whoever dismisses his wife and marries another commits adultery against her. And if she divorces her husband and marries another, she commits adultery." People were bringing little children to him in order that he might touch them, and the disciples spoke sternly to them. But when Jesus saw this, he was indignant and said to them, "Let the little children come to me. Do not stop them, for it is to such as these that the kingdom of God belongs. Truly I tell you, whoever does not receive the kingdom of God as a little child will never enter it." And he took them up in his arms, laid his hands on them, and blessed them. So let's start breaking down our Bible story this morning. Let's start with when and where. So our scripture today takes place with Jesus and his disciples leaving Galilee, and traveling to a place on the other side of the Jordan River. Now, as they're traveling, this definitely isn't like you and I hopping in a car. This is a walking trip that would have taken many, many days with lots and lots of pit stops. This pit stop is to be a place called Perea. Now, Jesus would have been around 30 years old at this time. So as he takes this pit stop in Perea, he's just beginning his ministry. And people are starting to notice who this Jesus guy is. Now, who's in our story today? Well, of course, you've already heard that Jesus is in our story today, but beyond Jesus, we've also heard that the 12 are there, our disciples. But this passage also involves who they're trying to get Jesus in trouble. They're called the Pharisees. Now, they come up a lot in the New Testament, but just who are they? Well, they're the Jewish leaders at the time, and they had a problem with Jesus. These guys were very powerful, and they felt that things were really doing well the way that they were because it was good to them. They got to wear fancy clothes and eat big meals, and they were in charge. But what Jesus was coming to do was to upset all of that. They didn't like that Jesus was talking about helping the poor, welcoming everyone into God's kingdom, or that Jesus was talking about everyone being saved just by knowing him. They're kind of like those mean kids at the lunch table that they don't want anybody to sit with anybody else because they feel like they're the cool kids and they get to be in charge. So we're going to think of our Pharisees like those cool kids at the lunch table, okay, wearing those fancy crowns and robes. So let's think about what's going on in our story here. What the heck is happening? Jesus is in the beginning stages of his ministry. So let's just say the Pharisees aren't a fan of these early stages in his messages. But Jesus was a pretty popular guy. So the Pharisees couldn't just come out and say, we don't like Jesus. That would have been very unpopular. Instead, they had to come up with clever ways into tricking him into saying the wrong thing. And that's where our story comes today. The Pharisees are opening up one smelly can of worms. One very smelly can of worms. They're trying to ask Jesus about divorce. Now, what you have to understand is, for a long time, people had known that divorce was not okay. It's a marriage at the very beginning, when Adam and Eve became one. But when the Israelites started groaning and moaning in the wilderness for those 40 years, Moses actually talked about, and the Pharisees bring it up, this idea of divorce, that a man could write a certificate of divorce. And the Pharisees try to catch Jesus and see if he's going to be okay with that idea too. Well, Jesus doesn't take the bait. The Pharisees say to Jesus, "Is it lawful for a man to divorce his wife?" And Jesus, being the smart guy he is, gives a great answer, and one that we often hear a lot at weddings today. Jesus says, "Therefore, what God has joined together, let no one separate." It's a mic drop moment, and the Pharisees don't really have a good answer for Jesus. It's the perfect answer. But surprisingly, Jesus' disciples are still wondering about this whole idea. They're not so sure. They're living in this world where they're pretty comfortable with the way things are too. And sometimes it's hard for them to hear Jesus upset things. But Jesus, in the nicest of ways that he can, repeats himself to the disciples as they are gathered privately. Jesus says, "Whoever divorces his wife and marries another commits adultery." We hear that word adultery in the 10 Commandments. Jesus is commanding us that marriage is something that should be so special and so sacred that divorce shouldn't even be an option. So why does Jesus wiring this story today? What do we need to know that Jesus is trying to teach us? Well, as somebody who recently got married, this passage, it has me thinking. as I think about marriage and I think about what Jesus is trying to say? Well, first and foremost, I think Jesus is reminding us that marriage is so much more than a checklist or laws that the Pharisees were thinking about. They were worried about following the law and looking to justify their actions or the actions of wealthy people so that it would be okay or justified if they wanted a divorce. But it's interesting that Jesus very quickly after this marriage conversation switches to talking about accepting God's love like a child. I think that's what I want to remember from this story. If we get so worried about the rules and regulation of life or even marriage, we lose what it's really about, finding that perfect person or God's perfect love. Children don't think about rules or consequences of loving somebody. They just do it. How often do we as adults worry about the looks and appearances of things instead of enjoying them for what they are? So kids, good job loving and living and loving things for the way that they are. Keep doing that. I hope that we as adults can remember that Jesus calls us to appreciate and to love purely, without condition, whether that be our neighbor, our church member, our parents, or our spouse. So let's go to God in prayer and be thankful for our story this morning. God, we thank you so much for the gift and the blessing of your Son, Jesus Christ. We thank you for the lessons that we have learned through him. We thank you for the wonderful gifts you've given us for love and marriage without condition. God, as we go this week, help us to love without condition. Help us to care for those without worrying about whether we're following some rule or regulation. Help us to love recklessly. And all God's people said, Amen.
So you can say, I'm a believer.